Login accepted.
Oh, wrong. So here are or here's the table of contents. First off, I'm just gonna briefly go over what Active Directory is again, and then next we'll be going over some reconnaissance and enumeration techniques, and finally we'll go over some exploits you could perform. So, little brief overview of Active Directory. Again, it's a directory service used in like Windows environments. Essentially, it just allows you to manage multiple users, computers, and other like devices on like pretty much one device from one device. So typically this would be in like it wouldn't be like a couple computers or users, it would be like thousands, a lot. So um it's pretty tough to like manage every single one without like Active Directory. So yeah. Um Pretty much everything in Active Directory is classified as an object. So that includes users, computers, etc. Um, and within an Active Directory environment, there is a domain, which is essentially like a logical group of users and computers that basically um, have security policies like implemented. They share like the same security policies and also provides like a mode of authentication and what am I forgetting? Uh, yeah, access as a security boundary too. And then trees and forests are just like multiple domains and stuff. Okay, now we're gonna go to reconnaissance and enumeration. So reconnaissance in terms of like the like scanning for like the Windows environments themselves, you're basically just harvesting information about the target domain or the groups of like devices in a network. So you can do this, or you can achieve this by running an Nmap scan on a network. Some common services associated with Windows you might find are SMB, which is like a sort of like Windows version of a file share, FTP, as well as LDAP, which basically stores pretty much all information or stores information of like every object in an Active Directory environment. Um, Kerberos, which is a ticket-based authentication method, as well as WinRM and RDP, which are both remote Windows like remote access um, methods. Yeah. The picture might be like a little bit small. I apologize, but so we ran like a port scan on the network and we found two devices. And again, usually Active Directory has a domain controller, which basically controls like everything within the domain, has a and some services you would find on a domain controller or services that a domain controller would host are Kerberos, LDAP, and I believe also DNS. So those services like listed on a device is usually like a telltale sign that hey, this is a domain controller and it's not like a regular Windows device. So I should probably target the domain controller. Or yeah. So I'll go over SMB again. It's just a file share on Windows. You would run this command, SMB client, just to access the file share on Windows. Um, if you're lucky, there may be like a um, there may be like no like password authentication, so you could like specify a flag um log in without a password. And this is probably like a great way or like a great like a first step to like get in a machine. And you could possibly if like the machine is just like super scuffed, you could probably like start doing like some lateral movement or moving within like the domain. Okay. Next is Kerberos. It's usually a again ticket-based user and service authentication. This makes it so that you don't have to consistently like input your creds whenever you try to access the service within active or within the domain. And this accomplishes that by issuing like ticket granting tickets or TTTs or service tickets, TGS. And usually there's a Kerberos key distribution center, which is also could be classified as like when you like, let's say you do like an LDAP query and you could find users, you would see that there is a user called, I think, key, like the key distribution or something K, I forgot. Sorry. You'll probably see it in the graphic in the upcoming slides, but yeah. And then LDAP, again, just stores everything or all objects within the domain. This command allows you to manually, or this command, LDAP search, allows you to query pretty much like any object in the domain. But you don't really need to use this command really, but yeah, it's there if you want to. The reason why you don't really need to use this command because there is another tool that I'll go over in the upcoming slides that I guess is more useful. Next, we have WinRM. So this is one of the remote protocols that you could use to connect to a Windows machine virtually, or not virtually, but remotely. Um, However, this one only allows you to connect to a Windows machine's terminal. So what that means is that when you connect using WinRM, you are not given a like a desktop interface or a GUI. Instead, it's more like a Linux, like, well, not Linux terminal, but like basically command prompt or a PowerShell prompt. So this command is evil winrm. Uh, Essentially allows you to again remotely access a Windows machine on a Linux device, but the reason why it's called evil is because it's usually used in like a pen testing environment. So, for example, this flag tag H allows you to use an MTLM hash, which is basically a password that's been hashed by Windows. So what that means is instead of using like giving like a plain text password to as like a credential, you could just use like the hash and then you'd still be authenticated somehow. Or that you could just log in without knowing the password, you just need the hash. And RDP is basically the same thing, except this time you're giving a GUI or like the actual like desktop environment you guys might be familiar with. Some tools you could use if you're connecting from Linux is XFreeRDP and Remmina. I think, yeah, XFreeRDP for some reason it's only terminal, if I'm not mistaken. But there's also Remmina if you want to connect with the GUI from a Linux device. Okay, so the next step for in the reconnaissance phase or recon is basically finding any users and basically try to harvest their credentials. Some useful tools are again Nmap, uh, enum for Linux, crackmap exec, or nowadays it's called netexec, RPC client, and then Bloodhound. So enum for Linux basically just enumerates info from like Windows um from Windows like machines in the network or file shares that are listed or file shares that are being hosted on these devices. Some useful tags are tag v verbose, which is like pretty much prints everything in like a readable format or like gives like specific stuff, additional details. And then tag u obviously just to specify username, and then tag p for password. Um, and another important useful tool or useful flag is tag capital P, which basically shows you the password policy that's being implemented in a domain. Oh, keep using that. So this is an example of like running enum for Linux. As you can see, it queries for these users in the domain. And then when you run tag capital P, again, you can see the domain's entire password policies. Oh, this tool is really cool. CrackMap or NetExec. It's a very versatile penetration tool for Windows. Um, you could enumerate as well as like execute exploits using this tool. So it's basically like a Swiss Army knife. And and if you're running on Kali, it should be automatically installed, if I'm not mistaken. Either CrackMap or NetExec, but yeah, this is pretty much like the command syntax for net NetExec, but there's also like multiple or yeah, multiple other flags that are pretty cool. But usually use these use um NetExec to basically implement these like enumeration or attack tactics on various Windows services, such as like SMB, LDAP, or some SQL Server, as well as like other various protocols. So here's an example. Um, so CrackMap exec was ran on the SMB file share that's being hosted on this IP or this device, and it's listing all the users. So over there, you see like, or at least users that has like access to like SMB. And then you can also use CrackMap to view the password policy. Okay, next we're gonna go over some exploitation. So we first like kind of have an idea of like what's going on in the domain or like the users. Now we could like try to access them or like attempt to log in as like one of these users. So some common attacks are some like well-known CVEs like Eternal Blue, Zero Logon, and some other like general attacks are anonymous service enumeration, password spraying, and ASREP roasting. So Eternal Blue specifically exploits Windows hosts that are running SMB version 1, but nowadays it's pretty rare because it's a pretty well-known CV, so most of the domains are not running SMB v1. And all you need is just like access to the network and then SMB v1 enabled on a device on an outdated Windows machine. And then basically, when you execute this exploit, you get system access to the machine, which is like essentially root. And then there's zero logon, which again exploits outdated domain controllers. So usually domain controllers are ran on Windows Server. So anything with like, let's say before Windows Server 2020, that domain or that domain, if like, okay, let me give you like a specific example, like Windows Server 2016, that domain controller will be susceptible to a zero logon attack. And when that occurs, you get full control of the domain. But next is password spraying. So it's just a brute force attempt by just using common passwords on all the users in the domain or a specific set of users. So you would typically run netexec or netexec, and then you specify the machine IP, and then you could use if you like extract all the users and or at least like the usernames themselves and then put them on a text file, you could then use that as like one of your arguments for the user flag. And then same thing with passwords. I know Kali has like a word list pre-installed, so you can use that as like your set of passwords that you want to essentially brute force your way into other or yeah, brute force your way into like the accounts that you see on the domain. Typically this takes like it may take some time, but yeah, that is one way. But if they have like if like the domain has like a decent like password policy and you attempt this, you might get like locked out by like the user. So you could like you won't be like you'd be unable to like log in for like I don't know 30 days or something, depending on the policy. And next is ASRep roast. Um, this basically attacks like accounts or um so it attacks accounts without Kerberos pre-authentication enabled, which is oh shoot. So a user with like this policy enabled is susceptible to ASRep roast attack. So this basically occurs during like the first few steps of Kerberos authentication, which is the requesting a ticket, granting ticket from the key distribution center. But since authentication or this user would not have Kerberos pre-authentication enabled, you wouldn't need to use like a credential or like password. So you would just skip the first step, which is this, requesting a TGT, and you would just like receive a TGT. So as an example, we ran netexec on the LDAP protocol on this machine. And then some reason we specified a password, but I don't think you need a password for ASRep roasting. And then after that, we specified the machine or the domain controller that's running a key distribution center, which is the dc.mini.lab, which is the domain name of the domain controller. And then tag ASRep roast is just specifying the type of attack or exploit we want to execute. And as you can see, when we execute this command, we get hashes of multiple users, which then you could use like something like hashcat to try to crack it. Okay, next is privilege escalation. So basically your goal here is to like work your way up to get like more like I guess privileges and eventually working your way up to like becoming like root or admin on a domain. So some useful tools again, Bloodhound. It's a really good way to like pretty much map out how you could like I guess gain privilege within a domain. And then some attacks you could perform privilege abuse, Kerber roasting, and service abuse. And and your goal is to or after like or your main goal of like privilege escalation is to or like the way you like escalate like your privilege or like move laterally is to perform credential dumps, which is basically extracting passwords from certain files or processes. So privilege abuse that just allows like essentially an attacker to um gain higher level access. Um and you could perform this or perform this using a exploit called Juicy Potato. So this example is demonstrating that command. So basically, um, so in this example, impersonate privilege allows you to impersonate like a different user after authentication. And as you can see, that state would be enabled. So you could basically do that. The Bloodhound, again, it just provides a visual and like representation of like the domain itself, or like at least like the relationship between like users and groups, and give like a potential like path for escalation. It's also gathered through Sharphound, so you could run remotely and stuff, or like directly on like so when you're running Bloodhound, it's usually on like a Linux machine remotely, but you can use Sharphound if you're using a Windows machine hacking into another Windows machine. So this is pretty much the visual representation of, I guess, like a domain and like how you could potentially gain access to administrators. So this user Alice is a part of these groups, or no, it's a member of this group, and it's this group is admin to that group. So this entire path or this like specific path here is a way to like or is like a way to essentially gain uh, uh a higher privilege user. So yeah, Bloodhound is just like a visualization tool that pretty much guides you. And then Kerberos, it occurs in the second part where you receive a request or a ticket. Wait, yes, or ticket granting or a TGS. So you in this portion, you request a service ticket and obtain a crackable hash. Unlike ASF roasting, you do need credentials for this. So, because and specifically in this part, um, you would need because it skips over like the first part, so you need to input creds. And the way you like or like the command line for that is NXC LDAP and then specify the IP, user, password, and then tac Kerber roasting, which is the method of or like the attack you want to perform. And output.text just basically outputs like result of that command onto a text file. So this would like put like the hashes onto that text file. But yeah, this is pretty much the process of like getting TGS or a ticket granting service. This is how like the key distribution center would like supply the T TGS to the user client. Dumping LSASS. This is a way to extract some creds or not creds, but the hashes of like users from a process called LSASS from its memory. Um, some requirements you need to have like some administrative like privileges, or otherwise even better just like become like have access to that administrator system. And yeah, this is basically extracts the password that's stored in the LSASS program's memory. This is an example of the command. Um, we're not using NXE. It's instead we're using a command specifically to dumping LSASS or LSASS. And as you can see, once you've successfully authenticated again with like a user with like administrative privileges, um, you're able to either get some hashes or even the password themselves. These passwords are kind of goofy. Next is SAM, which is like pretty much a file that contains all like user or like user and password information, if I'm not mistaken. Or it's just like a database that contains like information about users. Um, like LSASS, you need to have like administrative credentials, and pretty much you could use NXE and then specify that all you want to dump dump a SAM file. So in this command example, it specified like a user with like admin privileges. Um, and then it specified the um type of like credential dumping you want to do, which is SAM. And then you would input the IP address. LSA is pretty much the same thing. Um, again, it's another way to harvest credentials. You just have to specify LSA. So the command syntax is similar. And in this command, you get for the most part, you would receive some hashes. Deep happy, same thing. You need you need admin privileges um to basically get again user credentials all uh for all users need in the domain. And here's another example. And this one is like a big file, the ntds.dit. Um, it pretty much extracts all the domain credentials within the domain. So pretty much everyone. Um, again, you need to be domain admin or yeah, you need to have like administrative privileges. And syntax is the same for NX or Netcat. You just need to specify what type of um, file or could like type of credential you're dumping. Again, here's an example. And then pass the hash allows you to authenticate to a Windows service um, without using a password, but instead using the NTLM hash. NT again, it's just a someone's password that's been hashed. I believe like I think it's like an MD4 or MD5 hash. Um, and you would gain access to a service that could be running on Kerberos or yeah, just like a service running on the domain such as like a MySQL server or maybe like HTTP server, all that good stuff. Well, that's it. We'll go more in depth on Friday when you guys get your hands uh on our lab. So yeah, Friday come visit if you want to get some technical experience hacking into Windows. We'll it'll be on Friday from 4 to 6 at building 163, room 1005. So that's like our usual workshop meeting place. So yeah, I believe that's it. Is there any questions? Yeah. So basically, um, I I believe you could um have like a privilege. I'm not too sure, but um so there's like some privileges you could like potentially use in order to like I guess like I believe Juicy Potato would allow you to essentially like uh give you like these like specific privileges. So let's say for um like for this one, impersonate a client after authentication, I guess like once it's like enabled, you could like pretty much log in as like someone else. I don't know how to like not really well versed in Juicy Potato, but yeah, I at least that's what I think it does. But yeah, sorry if that didn't really answer your question, but um, any more? I believe some of them I used on like, or mostly it's just like from Google, or some of them I used from like a previous like home lab that I've done. So I remember using this tool called like Game of Active Directory, which essentially like allows you to deploy a vulnerable Windows environment and then perform like these like pen testing attacks on it. So some of them are probably most of them are like on Google, and then yeah, some of them are like, or at least like one of them. is like from my own machine. Yeah, so it basically did laid out like how like well every like user and like group and device that's like in like the domain, and it just mapped out like a potential like privilege escalation path. Yeah. That's a good question. So I typically like perform, I think it's better to use Kali because like Kali has like all these like pen testing tools already installed. That's if you get like the full version because I know there's like a Kali limited machine. So W. Yeah, I would use Kali. And Friday you guys are gonna be using Kali. I think that's all. So um thank you for attending this meeting and I hope to see you guys in Friday's workshop.